Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Whether you're watching a video or listening to a podcast version, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. Links to videos or MP3 files can be found at miamighostchronicles.com. You can also find information about my talk show appearances and any new book projects at marlenepardo.com, or go to Amazon and look up my author profile as Marlene Pardo Pellicer. I narrate several podcast series that can be found on major podcast platforms and also listened to via Alexa, Sonos, and other home systems. Look for Supernatural Storytime for scary storytelling, Nightshade Diary for classic horror and adventure stories, and of course Stories of the Supernatural for interviews with different guests as we talk about the mysteries of the unexplained. If you want to get noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy theories, and just about anything that is plain weird, you can visit Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi everybody, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. I know you're not going to see this for a little bit, but we're still, we're in the middle of, I don't know what to call this anymore. Just staying home a lot. How's that? I've told everybody because basically we can't go anywhere. I've been forced to do a lot of farm work. It's like I have no excuse to say I'm not working out in the back with the trees and everything because I'm here all the time. But, now here in South Florida, remember I was telling you we went through like a drought? Well, now, you know what that thing about, when your prayers get answered? Oh, my prayers got answered, and we're being slammed with a lot of thunderstorms, a lot, like days back to back of, and even though that's great for, as far as, when you have crops and everything, at the same time, you really have to, I've said it so many times before, talk about your priorities changing. That's the first thing I do when I get up is I need to check what's the weather report going to be? Because everything that I do or my day is planned around that. And I know people, you don't realize that, like I get it, when you're like living in a different reality, as in non-agricultural, you don't pay, like I said, I've said it before I would always hoping it wasn't going to rain because I wanted to plan my day like, hey, I want to go here, not anymore. And so, yeah, I'm thankful that we've gotten a lot of rain, but now we go into where the jungles overtake you, and that requires a whole lot of work. And like I said, you all hear those weird noises. It's that, everybody, the parrots, the roosters, everybody here is going to bed, and they need to let me know, and everybody know that's within range of hearing that's what they're doing. But anyway, guys, let's get to the good part. The good part being who I have with us tonight, and this is a gentleman that has been here before, and I'm so excited to have him back on, and this is Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer. He's also known as a psychic explorer. He's a fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's also a successful attorney, licensed to practice law in Florida, Washington, D.C., and before the United States Supreme Court. He graduated from Mercer Law Schools with honors, which included the study of law at Oxford University in England, and he also studied mediumship in England at the Arthur Findlay College for the Advancement of Psychic Science. He is the best-selling author of Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity, and he has an anticipated third book coming out soon, which we will definitely ask him about. He's appeared nationwide on TV and radio. He's appeared on national TV, including the CBS hit show The Doctors, and he mentioned something that he's also going to be appearing in an upcoming show, which we're also going to ask him about. And the hit show The Doctors, he provided information during a reading that helped concerning a cold case murder. He's also a featured speaker at conferences, expos, and universities, which include Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. And he's continuing the Mark Anthony 2020 Visionary Tour online by appearing on many shows worldwide, including this one. So please help me welcome the psychic lawyer, Mark Anthony. How are you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing wonderful. It's very nice to be here. Thank you, Marlene, for having me back on the show.
No, it is my pleasure. On the contrary, I'm super excited to welcome you back on. And certain things seem to be happening that we were discussing just a few minutes ago. But I'm not going to assume that everybody that's listening here has, heard our first interview. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because I know there's people out there, as far as your title of psychic lawyer, where people sometimes think of these are opposing fields, analytical lawyer versus psychic. How does that work with you?
Actually, they complement each other because both jobs revolve upon evidence. I mean, certainly attorneys need evidence to make their case. And as a medium, I practice what's known as evidential mediumship. And what that means is when I'm communicating with a spirit, Marlene, the spirit transmits to me information which I convey to the client. And it has to be verifiable pieces of information, in other words, evidence, to substantiate who the spirit is and the authenticity of the contact. The other thing about both of my jobs, and I just want the listeners to know that I'm putting my entire focus into my mediumship these days, although I appear on TV and radio and shows like this one as well, where I discuss high-profile legal cases. And I also assist with cold cases with law enforcement behind the scenes in my capacity as a medium. But I'm not taking cases and I'm not practicing law. But I have tried over 300 jury trials. I've been a prosecutor, criminal defense lawyer, a complex civil litigation. So I've been in the trenches. I've done it. And both jobs are about helping people. I know a lot of folks have very negative views of attorneys. They think that, all attorneys, when the sun goes down, we emerge from our crypt to suck the blood out of people. And look, I know a lot of attorneys, and I can see where that reputation comes from. But it comes down to this. When do you go see an attorney? 99% of the time, it's because something bad's happened to you. You've been arrested, you've been sued, you're losing money, you're getting evicted. I mean, something bad is going, you've been injured in your life, and attorneys help people get through difficult times.
Yes.
And so does a medium. By facilitating communication with loved ones in spirit, what I'm doing is helping people understand the continuity of life beyond the physical, and that is extremely healing for people.
Yes, I can imagine that sometimes, yeah. You know what? And when you think about it also, it's almost because I know there's people, like you said, that want that communication with a loved one, but they're also afraid of being taken advantage of. So they want to go to someone that they feel that they can trust. Right. Or that's reliable, or that it's like, well, this person is not going to take advantage of my grief. So that I can see where people are hungry for it, of course, depending on circumstances.
Yes.
But nobody wants to be, have their weakness, for lack of a better word, used against them when, when they, in other words, it's like, I want to, and I'm sure you've heard of some people that they're taken advantage of because they're basically told stuff and it's very not really accurate, but they're so hungry for it to be communication with that person that passed away that they latch onto it, and sometimes they
well, that's one of the problems with mediumship is that the history of mediumship is fraught with fraud. And there are heartless sociopaths out there that prey upon people's grief. I guess it's probably been close to 10 years now. In South Florida, there was the Rosa Marks scam. and she and her family were preying upon people. She was claiming that she was a medium, which clearly she was not, because a legitimate medium would never do those things. And she was telling people that their loved ones were trapped in hell and only she could get them out. She bilked people out of close to $30 million. And because when you go to a psychic or a medium, it should kind of be a one-time thing. And what I mean by that is, if you want to go back, I tell people give it at least 6 months or longer between appointments.
Right.
But if somebody tells you, oh, there's a curse on you, you're haunted, there's a evil spirit attached to your aura, or all this garbage. It's a bunch of nonsense, primitive, superstitious garbage is all I can call it. I could call it something else, but the thing is, and then they start telling you that, oh, if you come to me 3 times a week at $1,500 a pop, then I'll be able to get rid of it. That's clearly a fraud. Then I've also seen these people that pass themselves off as physical mediums. There's 3 different types of mediums. There's trance mediums, also known as channelers, like the great Edgar Cayce, who died back in the 1940s. And what Edgar Cayce did, Marlene, is he'd go into a trance-like state and spirits would speak through him. And he brought forth many medical cures and some really amazing pieces of information. Then I'm a mental medium. That means that spirits communicate with me. They're transmitting information into my brain, and then I'm communicating it to the client. And then there's people who say they're physical mediums. And while there's documentation of real physical mediums, they're extremely rare, but they say that they project ectoplasm. You know, we've all heard that from Ghostbusters.
Yes.
And the ones that I've observed, they make people sit in the dark and they blast real loud music in between the manifestations of the spirits that are supposed to be coming out of them. So you're in pitch black and you hear, they make these slurpy noises, they're blaring music, and they say, oh, we need the music to raise the vibrational frequency, which is a bunch of horse hockey, because basically their helpers are walking around with night vision goggles, moving things around in the room, and it's corny. It's like in the Haunted Mansion at Disney World when you go into the seance room and you see the Christopher, the woman's face, like, you know, and that is absolute fraud. I have not seen any one of those that I consider to be legitimate. And that's the problem. There are the charlatans out there. However, there are the legitimate mediums out there, people who truly do have the gift, have the ability, and those are the ones that you need to seek out if you want a connection with the other side.
Right, because I remember back in those times, as a matter of fact, this was those times where they like in the 20s, where they expected these mediums to produce ectoplasm out of different parts of their bodies. Yeah. And you look at that, and it's like, what? What does that have to do with, what does that have to do with spirit communication? But it was like, okay, this was what they got around as, like, if you were a legit medium, physical medium, you had to have some stuff floating around coming out of your ear and other places.
Yeah, you know, the trumpet flying around the room. I can believe people falling for that in the Victorian era in the 1920s and up to the 30s. What really astounds me is there's people who actually believe this nonsense now. However, there was the very curious case of Helen Duncan. And Helen Duncan was a physical medium who lived, she was Scottish, so she lived in Great Britain in the 30s, 40s, and 1950s. Mm-hmm. And supposedly, during her readings, ectoplasm would be projected from her body and form an image of the person communicating. So unlike these charlatans today where they make people sit in pitch darkness, it was a dimly lit room, but people could see the image of the person. Now, according to legend, Winston Churchill used to meet with Helen Duncan. She was his personal medium. And one of the lectures I give, called Rulers, Royals, Psychics, and Spirits, it goes into how psychics have been in the wings behind the thrones of power for thousands of years. And the British royal family and certainly Winston Churchill were very much involved with this. And what happened with Helen Duncan is that it was, I believe it was in 1940, it was November of 1941. Okay. She was doing a a session, and an image of a sailor, this young sailor, appeared, and he had the insignia of the HMS Barham, which was a British battleship, one of their big heavy-duty battleships.
Okay.
And a woman in the crowd goes, "Dear God, that's my husband." Now, unbeknownst to her or to Helen Duncan, 4 hours before that, the HMS Barham was in the Mediterranean, and it was moving to intercept an Italian convoy, which was going to be supplying the German and Italian army in North Africa, Erwin Rommel's Desert Fox. Right. And a German U-boat torpedoed the Barham, and it exploded, and 859 men died. And so 4 hours later, this woman is saying, "That is my husband." So she and other Navy wives went to the British Admiralty demanding to know what happened. Now, in World War II, the British were not releasing their naval losses, especially when one of their biggest and best ships. I mean, this wasn't a destroyer or cruiser. This was a full-on battleship, okay? 35,000 tons. I mean, this was a ship. And the British military wanted to know how Helen Duncan knew this. So they started putting her under surveillance. And then in early 1944, during a spirit communication demonstration, the British military police broke in and arrested her, and they charged her under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. Yes, and she actually was prosecuted, went to trial. It was a 2-week trial. She was convicted of witchcraft. She was the last person in Western Europe, in the Western world, convicted of witchcraft. And she was sentenced to like 9 months in prison. Well, Churchill was embarrassed, and of course his political enemies behind the scenes were vastly enjoying this.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because the British Prime Minister, unlike the U.S. President, doesn't have pardon power. So he couldn't just pardon her. And secondly, the question is, why did they do this? Well, the upcoming D-Day invasion of June 1944, when the U.S. and Britain invaded France to liberate France from the Nazis, and the British military was terrified that Helen Duncan could possibly do something which might expose the top secret nature of the D-Day invasion. So Helen Duncan remained in prison for basically the duration of the war. And Winston Churchill, and I've never been able to figure this one out, he lost the election in 1945. Right. I mean, come on, Winston Churchill. But at any rate, he was reelected in 1950 as prime minister. Well, by that time, he and Helen Duncan had parted ways, and she died broke and penniless. It's a really tragic story. But one of the first things Churchill did in the 1950s when he was reelected prime minister was have the Witchcraft Act of 1735 abolished, and instead it was replaced with the Fraudulent Mediums Act, which basically set the standards of what a medium can say and do. So there's quite a fascinating history with that. So there have been legitimate physical mediums, but if somebody tries to talk you into going to see one of these people where you have to sit in pitch darkness and they talk in goofy voices and blast music in between it, save your money and go to Disney World's Haunted Mansion instead.
Yeah, no. You know what? That's surprising because we only think that happened in the 1700s,
and it's still going on.
Were burned, and nobody thinks that less than 100 years ago they did something like that. Even if I'm sure that the excuse, like you said, was wartime. God forbid they should actually have believed that she was psychic.
Well, her grandchildren are still trying to get her name cleared.
Oh, really?
Her granddaughter, there was a petition online a couple of years ago. Just out of curiosity, I was looking this up recently because I'm doing some research. So there's still the, clear Helen Duncan. She wasn't a witch. She was a medium.
Right. Exactly. That's, what? I think as a family member, I would be doing that. Because to me, it would be like, at some point, okay, just admit we made a mistake. Sorry, but we made a mistake.
Oh, sure.
That's incredible. That's incredible when you think about it. Everybody thinks, if people would have probably thought, man, that's a great script for a movie.
It really, I wish that was, if I was a filmmaker, that's a movie I'd like to make. I think that would be amazing.
So let me ask something, Mark. Considering everything, when did you realize that you had this ability of spirit communication?
Well, it's when I was 3.5. Okay. And what is unusual about my family, I guess, is that this ability runs in the family. It appears to be what's known as a recessive genetic trait. Okay. For example, left-handedness. People are left-handed because it's genetic, and most people in the world are right-handed. So that's a dominant genetic trait. Recessive trait means it can skip a few generations. But both my mother and my father were mediums, and it runs back into at least into the 1890s. I've tracked it on both sides of the family. Okay. And the two families couldn't have been more different. My dad's family, they were these waspy Baptist Pennsylvanians. In fact, my great-great-grandfather founded the church in my dad's hometown, but my dad, his sister, his mother, and his maternal grandmother were all mediums, and it was kept quiet.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes.
And I remember my dad telling me that when he was a kid, he was probably about 12 or 13 years old, and it was really bothering him because he was a clairaudient. He used to hear spirits talking to him, and he knew that, you don't tell people I hear things, because he didn't want to be taken away. And he was always working because they had a farm and all this. Anyway, supposedly his mother and his sister and his grandmother had the ladies over on Thursday afternoons to play bridge. Well, he's listening through the parlor door, and they weren't playing bridge. They were doing readings and bringing in spirits. And my dad's like, oh my God, they do it too. And then my mother's side of the family, they had emigrated over from Italy. And my maternal great-grandmother, her name was Giovanna, and she was well respected in the Italian-American community of North New Jersey and New York City as the woman who knew things. Okay. And she was regarded with the respect of a mother superior of a convent. And nuns, priests, bishops, even cardinals would come to confer with her on spiritual matters. Okay. And PBS did a special on the Italian Americans. It was a 2-part special back in, I think it was 2016. They had an entire segment about my maternal great-grandmother, Giovanna, and they actually talked about her psychic abilities. Wow. So I come along at age 3.5, and I start seeing dead people, and I remember my mom was like, he's got it. And my dad's like, he's got it.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah. Yeah, you can't. And it's people don't realize that things like that, you can't help it. How's that? You just can't help it. As far as and luckily it sounds like your family, because there's that. I've heard of people having that ability, and the family basically shames the kid out of developing it. Or even worse, they just do not want to accept that they've got a child that has that ability.
Well, it's true. People fear what they don't understand. People fear the unknown. And then, there's all these biblical passages against it. And, I'm sorry, with all due respect. And I was supposed to be a Catholic priest. I went to Catholic school and because it's not unusual to be drawn to the spiritual when you are connected to it.
Yes.
But they're when people start slinging Bible quotes at me, mediums are not of God, you shall not seek omens. It's like, it also says that eating shellfish, pork is an abomination. Mixing dairy and meat is an abomination. That your daughter, if she enters a temple menstruating, she shall be put to death. If your neighbor works on the Sabbath, he shall be put to death. Come on. Let's stop interpreting infinity through Bronze Age superstitions. It's time to look at this, and this is what I explain in my books, particularly Evidence of Eternity, and in the new book that'll be coming out. Yes, this is a gift from God. Yes, God exists, but God is not a neurotic, insecure white guy sitting on a throne smiting people. Right. Okay, well, he's got a scepter, because that creates God as a narcissist. Yes. And we all know what narcissists and positions of power can be like. Well, that's not God. So God is an energy, and Edgar Casey talked about this. I actually think that this is what Christ was talking about the kingdom of God being within, and how God is in everything and around us, and how we're all brothers and sisters, that we're all energetically interconnected. And so now in the 21st century, there's a bridge between quantum physics and faith, in that we're seeing that the laws of physics are not violated by the concept of eternal life, and that consciousness does survive physical death. In other words, we have a soul, and who and what we are lives on after physical death. Right.
Which is, imagine why you use that title for your book, Evidence of Eternity. Because, I think everybody is, again, they want to believe that there's more to us than just our physical bodies. And again, what happens to us? I guess that's the big question. Do you go to sleep? Do you go to heaven? Do you reincarnate? What about ghosts? What are ghosts? Are those people that are stuck? Everybody always wonders what comes after that.
Of course.
And what is, and I've heard sometimes that, especially when you're an untrained psychic, sometimes, like, especially when you're a child, sometimes you witness things that are a little bit scary. Did that ever happen to you? Or how did you realize that it was basically dead people that were coming to you?
It never scared me. I mean, a lot of people are like, "Does this frighten you?" And I hear stories from my colleagues how they'd hide under their sheets at night and be afraid. I would be like, "Cool," I wanted to know what it was. But also, I had parents that understood what was going on, and they told me that you can control this, you can turn it on, you can turn it off. Talk to us about it. Don't talk to your friends or the neighbors, because, they'll think you're, even though we kept it quiet, we kind of were like, the Addams family in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's like, we understand, son. Don't worry. But that's good. That's great. That's great. And did you, what happened I imagine when you went into law school, did you ever see yourself doing this work? Or was it something later on that you decided to do?
I never, when I was in law school, and it's funny because, I graduated college, I think when I was 19, I graduated law school when I was 23, I was on a mission to save the world. And they kind of teach that in law school, that you're going to come out galloping on a white horse to save the Constitution. And then you get into the practice of law and see it's all about power, money, who's got the leverage, and truth, justice, and American. Our ideals of justice are lofty and noble, but our system of justice, I'm sorry, but it's a joke. Okay, because it's it's run by humans, and humans are flawed. But I would rather live under our system of justice than I would, let's say, Saudi Arabia's or Iran's
it's
or
one of
China's.
Those things that's different in theory and in practice, because let's face it, human beings, like you said, not everybody follows the script. It's like, all right.
Well, I was when I was a student, I remember being in Russia. I was in Russia. I was part of this exchange program, and I was smart. I was young. I was mouthy. And we had this guy that he was our guide, and we called him product of the state. That's what we would call him. He was product of state, And I think he'd had enough of my comments, because he was going on about Soviet Constitution versus American Constitution, and he's going how the Soviet has all these rights. And I'm like, wait a second. You would have us believe that the Russian Constitution really has the right of free speech? And I'll never forget, he put the papers down. He walks up to where, the desk I was sitting, puts his hands on the desk and leans over to me, or gets right in the face and goes, "American boy, difference between the Russian Constitution and American Constitution is not freedom of speech, but freedom after you make speech." And all of a sudden it dawned on me what he was saying, and it's like, okay, shut up, Mark. Now this is the time to shut up. And it's also very true. So, I see so many people bashing and crashing America, but I have been not just to Russia, but many countries. And the freedoms that we take for granted are really, really precious.
Yeah. I remember back in the 80s, I have an older cousin. She was a nurse, and she did something similar. Where they did one of these medical exchanges for nurses. Like, they had a medical team, like, come to Russia. This, of course, is when this USSR, this is pre-Berlin Wall and all that falling. And I remember, of course, when she comes back, everybody's like, well, what did you see? She goes, wow. She goes, nobody smiles. She says, when you go to the hospital, over here, we're thinking, if you share a room with somebody, it's tough. She goes, over there, they had, like, big wards with just basically lines of, cots, for lack of a better word, and your only privacy was a curtain. And she says, and over there, there's no such thing as retirement. Even if you're getting too old to, let's say, work, they would put you, like, sweep the steps of the, the whatever monument. There's no such thing as, hey, I guess I'm going to get my pension, my Social Security, and go live in Florida. No. That did not exist. This was back in the 80s, of course. She was saying, she goes, people are really serious too. And I was like, maybe it's just that it's really cold over there. But anyway, yes, I know what you mean as far as that sometimes we took for, or take for granted a lot of the good things that we have, that we just see it as, doesn't everybody live like this? It's like, no.
Well, we've been seeing this lately with the COVID-19 pandemic, how people don't want to stay in lockdown. And I certainly understand it, because we're all suffering financially because of this. And personally, I think the government should be paying the people more money, and instead of bankrolling big corporations, providing loans for them that they have to pay back. But the people, they should be paying, because then that would keep the protesters from protesting, and it would also keep people quarantined long enough, because all the experts are saying that if we do that, basically the number, the contagion will drop. Right. And but anyway, I don't want to get off into all that.
No. Let me tell you something. And because my background's in mental health, and I said, at the end of some of my prior shows, I said, there's a lot of immediate pressing concerns. Absolutely, economic, health, obviously. But I said, down the road, that there's a lot of mental health stuff. I said, not the obvious ones. I said, but there's going to be a lot of people. This is the first time that society, modern society, in other words. You can think of the Spanish flu where millions of people died. But modern society has gone through this worldwide. And I think there's a lot of people that mentally will be like, is this going to happen? In other words, it's going to be like a whole new way of thinking that some people I know are going to have a little bit of a hard time dealing with. You can still make plans. Your life still goes on. It's okay. It's not like any minute now, 2x4 is going to hit you on the head. Because of what we were saying, people lose their jobs suddenly. I've heard of people losing thousands of dollars because they had to cancel vacations and things like that. So I think sometimes people want to get back to normal, but are almost afraid, like, So
we are afraid.
Concern is that,
Yeah, people are afraid we're defenseless. There's no vaccine. And then there's all the conspiracy theories that Bill Gates is creating the vaccine to inject us with a microchip and all this stuff. And I'm like, so why would he do that? Okay, they say, well, so he can track us. It's like, yeah, but if you carry a cell phone, you can be tracked anyway. Right. And personally, I know a lot of people that say, don't ever get vaccines. I'm sorry, I travel so much. Like, talk about canceling. I had a whole U.S. tour. That's why I've turned the Visionary Tour, the 2020 Visionary Tour, to an online. That's why I'm here on Miami Ghost Chronicles with Marlene. Right. Yes, okay, exactly. Because let's take advantage of our technology. Right. But I'm used to being in 20 plus cities a year. That means I'm on an airplane a good 40 times a year. Mm-hmm. And this has been quite the adjustment. But the thing is, we must adapt.
Of course.
And we must have faith in our scientists. And on the bright side of things, for the first time in human history, scientists worldwide are cooperating, sharing information, and working toward a common goal. Yes. And what this shows us, And of course, humanity won't learn because, people being people, and it's not so much people, it's leaders and their egos.
Right.
But the thing is, if we put our brain trust to solving this planet's problems instead of figuring out technology, how to kill each other, we could solve the COVID crisis. We could cure the common cold. We could cure cancer. We could clean up our air, our water. We could increase food production without, destroying planet Earth. It's possible.
Yes, of
and
course.
We are being given that chance.
Yeah, it's
but
called, everybody on the common goal of that. And you said a very important thing. Take the egos out of the equation. Very important.
Sure.
Very important. Because let me tell you something. Yeah. The egos usually get in the way, have found, despite the best intentions of other people. So, absolutely. But let me ask you something. You mentioned something that you had participated in a case that was a cold case.
Yes.
How do you work something like that? Is it that you've got this? Do you see what happened, or do you have actually the spirit of that person? Let's say the victim, if they were a victim. Let's suppose.
Oh no, it was. I'll tell you. Yeah. Well, what happened in that case? And I've done a number, but the case I did on the doctors. This young lady, Allison Feldman. She was brutally raped and murdered in her own home, and she, squeaky clean person. Okay, she was I think she was a pharmaceutical rep. And I was going to be on the show, The Doctors, and they wanted me to do a reading. And I didn't know anything about this. All they said was, show up at this studio at this time. And they're like, now read these people. And they filmed it all. Long story short, she came through. The spirit of her came through. And she began to give me details and facts. And she told me that the killer will be caught, but he'll be behind bars when he's caught because he'll be on another... being held on another charge completely unrelated. And then also I kept getting broaden the parameters of the DNA test, and the father, and he's a very nice man, but he was very difficult during the reading because he wasn't cooperative and he was argumentative. But then he started coming around and he said, well, the police have the DNA. I said, that's not what she's saying. They have to broaden the parameters of the DNA test. And then I said, and I'm getting two names, Franklin and Phillips. And they're like, well, we don't know what that means. And I said that this is what's going to happen. Okay. And then there were several other things. I got like that she was left-handed. I talked about the DNA, and I could tell that from the spirit how the killer had tried to clean the murder site with bleach. Although he missed a few things, that's why the police were able to get the DNA sample. Okay. Long story short. Family goes back from L.A. back to Phoenix, where it happened in Arizona. Tell the police this. So the police, for the first time in the history of Arizona, implement on this case what's known as the familial DNA test, which broadens the parameters.
Yes.
And what it does is it looks for not 100% match, but matches of close family members. And immediately they found this one guy that was in prison on a child molestation charge. Wow. And they could tell that it was a close relative of his. And then his brother got arrested on his fourth drunk driving charge, fourth DUI, and the police were able to extract a blood test, and they put the DNA in the system, 100% match. Wow. So he was behind bars on a charge unrelated.
Yes.
Okay. Now the names Franklin and Phillips. The first time the familial DNA test was ever used, unbeknownst to me, was in the state of California, and it was used to catch the grim sleeper serial killer whose name was Lonnie Franklin.
Wow.
Okay? And he just died. It was just in the news. He just died in prison. And then a couple months after the reading, in the state of New York, a man by the name of Terrence Phillips was challenging the validity of the familial DNA test in court. Okay, so it was interesting the way the spirit gave me these two names, and from my research, the validity of the familial DNA test has been upheld in the state of New York. So And so now the killer is sitting in jail in Arizona awaiting trial for premeditated first-degree murder charges. And you asked, he showed me, or rather the spirit showed me what he did to her, and I knew what he did to her. And all I can say is I hope the full force of our justice system comes to bear on this guy. And it's not for me to deal out death and judgment, but I have a feeling he's going to get what's coming to him.
Well, isn't that, I believe that these are the same circumstances how they got the Golden Gate Killer. I know he went by several different names in California, that it was through the familial
DNA test, yeah.
That, I mean, this guy, they had been looking for him, since the 1980s. And as a matter of fact, they didn't realize that at some point that it was the same guy. Because he was a rapist, he was a murderer, he was, God, horrible.
Oh, DNA. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that, and look how it comes out. If it wouldn't have been for a relative that submitted their DNA, not because of a crime, but I believe they submitted it for one of, what people do now, just for ancestry purposes. And they had DNA from one of the crime scenes, and that's how they traced it. I believe that's the story.
DNA evidence has changed the face of the legal system entirely, and it's really been a good thing because I know the Innocence Project that's going and looking at cases where people have been convicted and they're sitting on death row, and it's finding that a lot of them are not guilty. Exactly. And then there's other people that now, like in the case of Allison Feldman, that you can find a direct match to this. So our DNA is as unique as our fingerprints. When people tell me they doubt the existence of God, it amuses me because as far as our science can say and can tell, no two people have the same fingerprints. No two people have exactly the same DNA. Right. Coincidence?
I can imagine as an attorney, how could you ever defend that? I mean, if that evidence is produced, how do you say, no, it's not him?
Yeah, well, throughout my career, I had to, when I was a prosecutor, that was one thing, okay? Because, then you're the good guy, okay? Yeah. And, at least theoretically, because the job of a prosecutor is not to secure convictions, but to seek justice. Exactly. And prosecutors are under an affirmative obligation that if exculpatory evidence, in other words, evidence that would indicate the defendant is not guilty, you have to immediately disclose it. However, there's always unethical prosecutors who are more concerned with their egos and winning than they are justice. Thankfully, they're few and far between. The objective of a criminal defense attorney, in my view and in my experience, is much more difficult because, here you are with this person who did this heinous, horrific, dastardly deed, and you got to defend him or her. Right. And the way you have to look at this is I am not condoning or endorsing that behavior. What I am doing is protecting the Constitution of the United States. We are all guaranteed a free trial. We are guaranteed certain rights. It's kind of like when you play Monopoly, lawyers are the people who've read the inside of the Monopoly box. Okay, we've actually read the rules. And you got to make sure that everyone plays by the rules. Right. And because so many people say, well, we know so-and-so's guilty. Why do you need a trial? Well, because we don't live by mob justice. Yeah. And if you start eroding the right to trial, where does it end? Exactly. Okay. So, we could go on and on about that, but there were many times when I had to defend people who were just absolutely evil individuals. And, you have to do your best to protect their constitutional rights, not to condone their behavior. Well,
exactly. And I'm sure that you found just because sometimes people look like they're guilty, sometimes it turns out they're not.
Sometimes they're not.
Or of that crime, because we can't, you can't, I'm not a lawyer, but from what I understand, you can't find somebody guilty and say, well, I know he did something else, but this one, so we'll get him for this one. And it's like, you can't do that.
You can't do that, yeah.
So yeah, the thing with the DNA, I know that as far as law enforcement and like prosecution or defense, it brings like a whole different. And I'm thinking to myself nowadays, if you do a crime, whether I imagine robbery or murder, whatever it is, it's really difficult not to leave DNA behind somewhere. It's like I think of it as
Well,
almost
it is.
impossible.
It is, and it would be very nice if the type of people that would commit these crimes would sit down and logically think that, if I do this, I'll get caught and I could get the death penalty. But the problem is the type of people that do those sorts of crimes don't think like that.
Right. Oh no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I know for a fact that sometimes there's mental health issues and compulsion and God knows, when we're not talking either revenge or jealousy, when people have that stranger on stranger crime that you think, why would you do this to this person? You didn't know them, why would you do that? But they're compulsive or they're or psychopaths or whatever. There's a whole slew of stuff. So in that when you were doing that, were you surprised when this spirit came through, or it was one of those things how do you know sometimes that it's let's say a victim of a crime versus just somebody wanting to give a message to a loved one?
Well, what happens is when a spirit comes in, first I get a gender, then I'll get an idea of the connection to the person that I'm doing the reading for.
Okay.
I feel the love connection or the generational connection, and then they start transmitting to me facts and details about themselves, about the person I'm doing the reading for, and then about how they died. And I remember I was doing a reading for this husband and wife, and this young man came through, and I said, I keep feeling this all over my body, and I could see them shuddering, and I said, what? They go, our son was stabbed to death multiple times. Wow. So, I was feeling it like, someone's come up and jabbing me, because what happens is the spirit is transmitting these sensations to me because these are identifiers. And I've had people say, why don't they just tell you? Well, you have to realize this isn't texting or instant messaging. We're living in the material world, and then the other side's a different dimension. And as Albert Einstein said, there's no matter, there's just energy which vibrates at different frequencies so as to be perceptible to the senses. So we're here, let's say we live in AM radio, the other side's FM radio. Well, I got to bring my brainwave frequency up out of AM. Spirits have to bring theirs down out of FM. We get a frequency match. And so when you have that electromagnetic connection, they start emitting waves of frequency which go into my brain. And then my brain's electrical field interfaces with the electromagnetic field of the spirit. And then that impulse gets converted into recognizable concepts based on my memories, feelings, and cultural associations. Mm-hmm. So the spirit is telling me he was stabbed to death because I'm feeling jabbing sensations all over my body. Right. And I'll see things, I'll hear things, I'll know things. It's fascinating, some of the material that comes through. I was doing a reading for this lady one time, and her mother's spirit was talking about her son, and I said, does your son see things differently from one eye to the other eye? And I go, there's something about, and the client said she didn't know, and then she called me back 2 days later, and she said, my son told me he recently went to the eye doctor, and he sees color differently in one eye than he does the other. And it's a very rare condition. It's like, I didn't even know there was. I've heard of being nearsighted in one eye and farsighted in the other, but being colorblind in one eye but not the other. And now how could I possibly make something like that up?
Right. It's like so obscure. that's really
it's interesting stuff. Yeah.
That, which, of course, I'm sure that maybe what that spirit was trying to prove is to his loved one is, this is me. It's me.
This is me, and I'm around you, and I'm aware of what's happening in your life. Right. And it's just so interesting, the things they bring up. I was doing a group reading. I do large group readings, mm-hmm. and then I do what's called a light circle, which is limited to 10 people. That way I can guarantee everybody gets a reading. And there was this one woman, and her father came through, and he kept showing me the seven dwarfs, but he kept showing me grumpy Grumpy.
Okay.
And I said, what's with Grumpy? And she started laughing. She goes, I have a Grumpy collection. I collect statues of
What?
Grumpy the dwarf. And I'm like, what?
Oh my God. See? What are the chances of that? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it was hilarious.
That is like, that's a one in a million. That's a one in a million. That's like, okay. Because that, let's face it, what was it? I've never heard of, I mean, I know people collect stuff, but what are the chances that you're going to like,
I'm like,
pick
Grumpy?
Grumpy the dwarf. It's like that. That's like, that's unusual. Because if you tell me Star Wars, maybe a little bit more, but Grumpy the dwarf, it's like, no. Now, let me ask you, one of the things I wanted to ask you was that what you meant by the grief, crime, grief, as in, what is the relation? Is that something that you were talking about before, or something that happens after the crime has been committed?
Grief, crime, grief is one of the concepts that I discuss in my book, Evidence of Eternity. And earlier when you were talking about being a lawyer and a psychic medium, this is where they melded, and I developed this. What I've found in my work as both a medium and as an attorney, Marlene, is that many times in someone's developmental stage, either as a child, a teen, young adult, there's an unresolved death. Could be a parent, grandparent, sibling, a really close friend, and that's not dealt with properly. Right. And I found in my work as an attorney and as a medium that not all families have a mother or father, and they sit down and they discuss things and go to counseling. Many people are from single parent homes, or they're raised by collateral relatives or foster homes. And so when grief is not properly dealt with, and a lot of people are, they're raised in homes like, hey, dude, don't think about it. Their father's,
right.
Not, he's not the model father or mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is the grief is not dealt with, and you can't ignore grief. You can't drink it away. You can't snort it away. You can't smoke it away. You can't shoot up away. You can't have enough sex to stop thinking about it. So what happens is the grief leads to criminal behaviors.
Yes.
Okay, so if you start drinking or doing drugs, I knew one lady who used to steal things because she got the high from stealing things.
The shoplifting?
Shoplifting,
yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But take a drunk driver. I mean, how many alcoholics and drug addicts do you know that you've met, you're in the mental health field, that are happy people? None of them.
No, they'll pretend. If you look
they'll pretend. So the grief leads to criminal behaviors, which can then lead them to inflicting grief upon somebody else. So you have an unresolved death in your family, you drink heavily and do drugs, you get behind the wheel of a car never intending to kill someone, and you do.
Yes.
And so what I've found is, I know that in the criminal justice system, people with alcohol and drug problems, they want to get them to alcohol and drug counseling, which I agree with. But I also think we need to make sure that the grief issue needs to be dealt with. Let's get to the root of the problem as opposed to treating the symptoms of the problem.
Yes.
And so I have found in thousands of cases, both as an attorney and as a medium, that grief, crime, grief is a horrifying cycle, and we need to break it. And so that's why, when there is a death in a family and there's young children, don't tell the child to ignore it or not think about it.
Right.
They need to go to counseling. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be treated, because you've got to break the grief, crime, grief cycle.
Yeah. No, and I mean, I know a lot of it. I know some families, they think that they're shielding the child. And I understand everything has to be age appropriate, absolutely. But sometimes children are of an age that they could understand given the right explanation, but the parents or the family, they want to shield them, so they do exactly what you described. Will not talk about it. Or they give them some kind of like little fantasy story, which the child...
Daddy's in heaven.
Right. And the kid is like, no, Or he went out, he's taking a trip, or, God, you get like a variety of different... And there comes a point where kids are smarter. Like I said, age-appropriate explanation, but... Absolutely what you said, just denying or giving them some fantasy story. And then, of course, if they ever ask about it again, they're told, don't talk about that. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't think about it. I mean, a friend of mine passed, and he left behind a 4-year-old, and his wife kept telling the 4-year-old, "Daddy's in heaven." And one day, he was like, he turned 5. He says, "I'm tired of hearing Daddy's in heaven. Where's heaven? Where is he?"
Right.
So the Daddy's in heaven wasn't working anymore. And this is where the counseling and telling the child what happened. Life isn't easy. Life is difficult. There's a line in the book The Hobbit that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, and the Hobbit Bilbo says it's a dangerous business going out your front door. Yeah. And we don't think that. You go for a walk, or you jump in your car or whatever. You don't know if that's the last time you're ever, going to be in the material world.
Yeah. I mean, and I know that especially as you're younger, you think only old people die. Especially when you're younger, you think you're invincible, or it happens to the other guy, and it turns out that. And
sadly. Yeah, people say, "Why did this happen to me?" And the better question is, why not?
Yes. Exactly.
Nobody is immune from grief. Death is something we all have to deal with. The journey through grief is a road no one wants to take, but it is one we are shoved down at some point in our life. And that's been the crux of my work as a psychic medium, to facilitate communication between people in this world and the other side. And also in my books, Never Letting Go, which is a guide on the journey through grief, and Evidence of Eternity, which bridges the gap between the spiritual and the scientific. And I want to go ahead and, for all the listeners, Marlene, of your show, yes, if they go to my website and they would like to certainly, purchase the books, it gives you the link to Amazon there, right, to sign up for my newsletter. But if you would like to book a telephone reading with me, and telephone readings are just as accurate as in person, right, if, in the application form, if you mention Marlene's name, yay, or the Miami Ghost Chronicles, you will be eligible for a reduced fee reading. Wow. And this is something I'm doing during the COVID crisis. But yes, you have to say Marlene Pardo and or Miami Ghost Chronicles, yes, to qualify for the reduced fee reading. Yes. Because, we're all hurting right now, and we all have to do our part. And this is how I'm trying to help people.
For different reasons. We were talking before we started to record, Mark, about that there's been a very high incidence of elderly people that have passed away. And, yes, everybody thinks, well, you're old, you're supposed to, yeah. But still, that doesn't make it any less painful.
No.
For families, especially since some of them couldn't be in to see where, if they were in some type of assisted living or things like that, where sometimes maybe, like to soothe their heart. I mean, like I said, my mom passed away recently, and she was elderly. I knew it. I was prepared. You're going to get.
It still hurts.
It's inevitable. But sometimes the circumstances have a lot to do with how you feel about it afterwards. So yeah, I'm sure that there's also people out there that even if it was an elderly relative or parent, they still want to say, "Are you okay?" I'm sorry I couldn't be there next to you. Whatever the case might be.
Well, sure. There may be unresolved issues. Not everybody comes from. See, you and your mother had a very loving relationship. Some people don't have that. Yeah. Some people, the last words they had with a loved one, yes, who died may not have been all warm and fluffy. We all don't have the TV special where someone's laying in bed and everyone's around them and you get to make the speech to everybody. It doesn't work that way.
Like
sometimes.
A Hallmark kind of channel. A
Hallmark. I have to admit, I remember my dad died. He died in 2017. He died in early November. And what got me through that was watching those Hallmark movies. I know. Because I realized it was like taking a Xanax or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? No. It was pure fluff. And, it's so predictable. I mean, you can always tell the plot 10 minutes into it, but it didn't matter because for a limited period of time, I was in this fantasy where the biggest crisis somebody had was they didn't have enough chocolate chips for the cookies they had to bake. Some stupid thing like that.
Right. You knew that at the end, everything was going to be resolved.
The stressed female executive from New York who goes back to visit her families and runs into a guy that sells Christmas trees, blah, 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 fill in the blank.
Exactly.
But the thing is, sometimes we need that fluffy escapism.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's safe. And, for me, growing up, it was always Star Trek and Star Wars. Yeah. And I remember when I met Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Catherine Janeway of the Starship Voyager, and it was really nice talking to her. She was really cool, and she said, everyone is entitled to an addiction. She goes, Star Trek. She goes, it's safe. You don't get arrested for liking Star Trek. And we were laughing about that. But there is a reason that people engage in escapism. Yeah. It's not always a bad thing. Now, the escapism of drugs, alcohol, and impulsive behaviors. Now, that is what can take you from the grief into the crime to inflicting the grief. Right. Exactly. So that's and addictions are very, very dangerous things, and you have to keep an eye on that.
Let me tell you, there's a type of addiction that it's called video game addiction, by the way. And people don't realize how widespread it is.
Sure.
It's basically because with an addiction, in some cases, besides the act, let's say you're talking a process addiction, like gambling or shoplifting or video. You're not injecting yourself, but it does that distraction. It quietens the anxiety. But what happens is it pulls you out of real life. Your real, what you're supposed to be doing, living life, goes on the back burner. And those are the people, I'm talking not about you're playing your video games, but the ones that want to do, like, all of a sudden their identity is the characters, or they spend the majority of their days, these video game consoles. And even if they go out, they want to, just like an addict, they're waiting to run back home so they can play again. And I point that out because sometimes when you say addiction, everybody always thinks of, like what you said, illegal drugs, or stuff like that. And there's a lot of things that will pull you out of real life, i.e. also the good and the bad, the tragedies, the bad feelings, the negative things that happen to people. It's like, hello, that's the human condition, to that pretend. Because, and you made a good point, Mark, when you were watching these Hallmark movies, which were, and it was like a bridge. It was something that you use. And I myself do it. Sometimes I go through these 1980s movie binges because I've seen it a million times. The plot's very predictable and everything, but it's like, oh, I got that. I remember the 90s. This was a great time. And, all right. And everybody had a, mullet cut and, and wore, the ponytail coming out of the side of your head. But hey, it's okay. But that's about the extent of it. It's like, but now I live in the 21st century, and it is what it is, the good and the bad. And I'm sure there's going to be times in the future where people think back and go, yeah, those good old days back in the 21st century. So life was so simple back then. Of course, we become... and I do a lot of research and I read sometimes clippings of old newspapers, and you'd be surprised sometimes how repetitive or something that happened 100 years ago was very earth-shattering to them back then. And we look at it and we're like, but it was the same thing. Concerns about the economy. Back then, let's say when they had the Spanish flu, different things that there's also a cycle of repetition, and we come through it. Out the other end. Interesting
along those lines. In the city of Pompeii, that was destroyed by the volcano back in the first century AD. When archaeologists were excavating it, they found on a bunch of the walls graffiti that ancient Romans had written, and it was political.
Yeah.
It was sexual.
Yes.
I mean, it was the article that I read. They were saying it is so much like the graffiti of today. And you don't think about ancient Romans writing graffiti.
No.
It's hilarious, because you see people write, I don't like this particular politician or blah, 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 and I'd really like to do this. And it's funny because the sexual graffiti, they're writing about various gladiators. Apparently, the gladiators were the thing back then. And it was just so interesting how much have people really changed, I mean, I've been all over the world, and I would say that most people, the vast majority of people, want to have a roof over their head. Yeah. They want to have enough money to eat. They want to come home from a job to somebody who loves them, and they want their children to live in a safe neighborhood and be able to go to school. Yeah. Okay? The problem is you get the ego people, the religious fanatics, the jihadists, the Christian fanatics.
Extremists.
You get the extremists, the political narcissists. Mm-hmm. You've always got to have the control people, and they are the ones that seem to spoil the lot. And somebody was telling me, they said, look at all these people that are rebelling, in Michigan and all these other places, and they want to overthrow these rich people that are running things. And I said, well, that's happened before. Okay, it's happened many times in history. Remember in the French Revolution when the people were sick of the kings and they got rid of the king and they ended up with Napoleon. Gee, that was an improvement.
They just went through just about everybody. And it was like
through everybody, then they end up with something worse than they could have possibly imagined.
It was like and it's true. And I've said it before on the shows, we're complex, but at the same time, happiness for most humans, like I said, most. It's quite simple, like what you described. It's not that complicated. It's not, we're not that complicated. And I want to say most of us are kind of resistant to change. So I think that's why a lot of people are wigging out now going, oh, why? Like you said, I just want to go to work and watch my Netflix. And I had plans to go on vacation or my wedding or my, all these things that, that everyday. When I say every day, normal people are engaged in, that make you happy, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, that's why I think a lot of people, we want to go back to our rut. Even though sometimes people complain a lot about the rut, we want to go back to our rut.
They miss it, don't they?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to go ahead, Mark, and I'm going to include the link in the credits of the show to your website. And again, I'm going to mention what you said about the discount, because I think that there is a hunger there, regardless of the reason, for people sometimes reaching out to people that have departed. I think sometimes you are absolutely right. Sometimes it takes years after the death, maybe of somebody that they didn't have the best relationship, but they're kind of over it. Like now they're ready maybe to reach out and get in touch with that person. I imagine it doesn't always have to be a recent death. No,
it can be the person may have passed years ago. There's no expiration date on spirit communication.
Right. And sometimes people right away, I imagine, are just not ready. They're like...
No, I always tell people to wait at least 4 to 6 months after the passing, because if you come right afterwards and you're hysterical, crying, and you're upset, of course you want the contact. But what are you going to get out of the reading if you're not able to listen, or you're in that fog of grief where you can't pay attention? And so 4 to 6 months, the new normal has begun to form, and there's emotional stability, and then you'll be able to get the maximum benefit out of the reading. Because I've had people, they wanted to come to me right away, and they were crying and overcome with the grief. And certainly I understand that. But spirit communication is an important therapeutic step in the journey through grief, but when you're ready for it.
Exactly. And most importantly, that they cannot undo what's happened, in other words. There's just no way to undo it or make it different or have a different outcome, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I can see absolutely that's a very wise counsel as far as telling people you just need to wait a little bit before you use somebody like me to reach out and whatever validation, which I imagine a lot of people don't, they just want to know that other person's okay. Like,
oh yes, many times, and of course the spirits are always okay, but and people are like, well, I don't know how that would help me. It's going to help you a lot. It helps you understand that God exists, heaven exists, or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. Our soul's an immortal living spirit. We can communicate with those souls, and that we'll be reunited with them when it's our time to cross into the light.
yes.
And spirits are not here to frighten us or harm us, but they can also offer important guidance. Plus, during the readings that I do, I get a tremendous amount of medical information about the person that I'm doing the reading for, because spirits can give that. And I've got so many instances where they've highlighted and alerted somebody to a very serious problem that they're able to head off at the pass. And unfortunately, I also have stories where people who outright rejected what was coming through sorely regretted it afterwards.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Again, Mark, thank you so much for the time you spent. And I want to wish you the best of luck on your tour.
Thank you. Namaste.
And I mean, namaste. It's like, hey, what is that thing about you're taking the bull by the horns, and, I'm always got my thumbs up for people that say, okay, this is what's happening. I'm going to work it out. And hey, like you said, let's take advantage of our technology.
Thank you.
Take
God
care.
Bless.
Likewise. Bye-bye. Wow. Let me tell you something. That's very powerful information, by the way. I want you to understand that. Very, very powerful information. And the reason I say this is I wasn't kidding, and right before we started rolling, I lost my mom. She was 90 years old, right? December 28th, as a matter of fact. Like, days before this thing started going. And I was telling her, I said, you know what? My mom, she had very, you're 90 years old. I knew it. She was in assisted living and hospice and so forth. So it was one of those things that it's not like, wow, what a surprise. And I told him, you know what? I'm glad she died when she died, because I think it would have been so difficult, because you hear of so many families of their loved ones, the elderly people being in these nursing homes and not being able to you can't see them. You're not allowed to go see them. You don't know what's happening. That it was like, in a way, it was a blessing in disguise. It was a blessing in disguise, because I don't know what I would have done not knowing, is she okay? Is she, or having to, go with a go-between, and especially when you have an elderly person like my mom that she had dementia and Alzheimer's, and that it's not like somebody, even if you're elderly, that you can say talk, or even, let's say, call on the phone, because that's another thing. You can call on the phone. Let's say if you've got an elderly person, they might have health problems, but they can talk on the phone, and at least you can speak to them via the phone if you can't go see them into where they're at. But if you have a loved one that cannot even do that, that's a tough one, let me tell you. So, like I said, I'm gonna have a link to Mark's website if you guys want to get a reading from him, because. And then there's other people. I'm gonna say, whether you've been touched by this thing with this COVID thing or not, or you've been. For some people, it reminds them of our mortality. And it almost, there are certain people, believe it or not, especially if they had a turbulent relationship with a loved one, especially a close loved one, that they suppress the sadness or suppress feelings or ignore it, or in other words, refuse to experience the grief that comes with having a reading, because God knows, especially if you had a difficult relationship with this person, you're wondering, am I going to reach out to this person and we're going to take, where we left off, which was either maybe an argument. I mean, I've heard of that. People die unexpectedly and the last words exchanged between two people was an argument. Is this person going to say something to me and make me feel worse? Are they still mad at me? Things like that. And sometimes moments like this when people are reminded of our mortality, they're kind of ready for that moment of, you know what, they in other words, they're not a coward anymore. And they're ready to reach out and see if they can communicate or receive some type of communication from this person that passed away. My experience that I've heard is that usually people that are afraid, usually the communication is very good. From what I understand, most people say it. If they have a wound in their heart, it soothes it, because no matter how bad or turbulent or argumentative the relationship might have been between people when they were alive, it's almost like that person. They're different. They aren't, and they are. In other words, they have no interest in resuming warfare. On the contrary. And I've heard of a lot of people saying, I don't know why I delayed that, because after I had that reading, it's been the best thing that I ever did, because I feel better. It soothed my heart. I've always, like that thorn or that burr under the saddle kind of feeling. And I was afraid of doing it. I was afraid of, what if this person said something, and and to be honest with you, I can't remember of anybody saying, no, it was horrible. Sometimes it doesn't matter anymore. Harsh words that were spoken doesn't matter anymore. Are you okay? Yes, I'm okay. I'm happy. Or don't worry. People sometimes they feel bad. Somebody passes away. They couldn't or wouldn't go to their bedside when they were dying. And the other person says, don't worry, I understand. It's okay. It happens. People change. What is it that when you're mad or when you're upset, guilt, all those things sometimes, having sometimes the readings puts it in perspective as far as it doesn't matter anymore. Especially when it's a turbulent relationship that's been like that for years, okay? Between family members, friends, even close. It's just a turbulent relationship for years, argumentative, you name it. I mean, then you think, wow, this is forever. There's a rift here that cannot be mended. And it's almost like once the deceased one goes over, like they have the bird's eye view of really what's important in life, and they realize sometimes it doesn't matter anymore, and there's other person or persons that are left behind. They don't understand sometimes how thirsty they are to receive that it's okay, I'm okay, it doesn't matter anymore kind of message. And not until they hear it, in other words. And then they feel that weight lifted off their shoulders, perhaps. Or that doubt, or that guilt, or even the what did you think, well, how can you stay being mad at somebody that's dead? Yeah. Some people get mad at other people for dying on them. I know it sounds like, wow, talk about the how can you be mad at somebody? I've even heard of it in cases of suicides, where some people go through these stages of grief where they get mad at the person that committed suicide, but then there's people that get stuck on that, like the needle on the record, once upon a time. Yeah, for those people that remember what turntables are, they get stuck there and they never go beyond it. They get so upset that that person did something, either risky behavior, or they took their own life, or something, or that they never get beyond it. They just stay mad. They just stay mad. Or you abandoned me, or you left me behind, or how could you, or you didn't give me a chance. God, there's a variety of things. And they don't realize how much that is there. And he made a very, very, very good point about, especially when you're a child, and I've spoken about this before. You know, when you're a child, you are under the control of an adult or adults. And what he said in the case of a loved one or somebody passing away. But you have to understand, for a child, who they really care about as far as deaths are for somebody that they know and love. Okay? In other words, let me give you an example. If you have a child who has a parent who they've never had any contact with, is not important in their world, and that person dies, they don't fake it. They don't know how to feel. They don't have, like a sadness, because a child's world is more, who they care about it's the family or the people or the parent or whoever's around that takes care of them. The person that's there, that daily, that bonding. And it's when one of these people in their world passes away that then, like I said, age appropriate, of course, that you need to give them some type of explanation. And, and also ask them how they feel and what they think. And a lot of times, what do you feel? And they'll tell you, kids, or something they'll try to, and then, you might have to give that explanation more than once. Because sometimes you say something to a kid and they kind of digest it a little bit, and they come back to it and they go, well, but, like what you said, well, what is, be prepared to say, well, this child is going to come back. We can ask them, is there something else you want to know? Did you understand what I explained to you? Go ahead, ask me whatever you want. Sometimes that's a very, very difficult thing for an adult who might be grieving themselves to do. Because they're burdened down by, obviously, their own grief, or by not wanting to talk about it. But, if you're an adult responsible for a child, you owe that child that. Because that child depends on you to help them understand it and deal with it. Because, believe me, as a parent, we want to protect our children at all costs from all negative. And sometimes you try your best to do so, but then certain things happen that are beyond your control, and you're faced with that kind of situation where this child is being impacted by the death of somebody that they loved or was close to them. Sometimes it's even a pet. I know people are going, yeah, children sometimes are very attached to their animals. Whatever the case might be. I'm not saying the loss of a human being is more important. But whatever the case might be, that, you need to try to make them understand what is the concept of death, what happens, and let them ask you. And then be ready for another question, maybe a couple of days later, when they'll do that. For people that have children, they'll understand, but why? Yeah. Oh yeah, when you give an answer, yeah, but why? It's like, okay, this is going to go ad infinitum. But why? Because they're just like trying to open their minds to this new experience, or your concept of time. Let's face it, when you're a child, you say a year is like forever. You mean a year? I have to wait a year? Christmas, another year? A holiday, my birthday, another year? A year was like forever. Because your concept as a child of time is very different as when you're an adult. So, yes, I have seen what he described, where people internalize that grief because it's just never handled appropriately when they're a child. And they just start doing, they have different coping mechanisms. And, some people I've heard, especially let's say it's a sibling group, you know, let's say the example of a parent that passes away. And you'll have one sibling which is hurt, but they don't go wonky on you. They hurt, but then there's the other one that is totally ends up doing. And everybody's like, well, but that one. And it's like, yeah, but we're all different. We're all different when it comes to grief. There's a lot of different reasons. While you'll have one person more affected than the other, because we're not that one size fit all emotional response. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. So that thing about like, well, one sibling handled it, why can't you? Or and this is my favorite, you have to be a big boy about this, or you have to be a big girl, or God forbid, that, and I have seen this where all of a sudden they try to make the child, well, now you have to be like the adult. You don't have to be an adult about this. Kind of like they want to rush this child into adulthood because now, hey, we don't have time to let you be a child anymore. That is disastrous. That is disastrous. Especially, if it's not handled appropriately. No doubt, a child's going to be affected, the composition of a family, but there's different ways. And the last thing you want to do is to hurry your child into adulthood or adult problems, or asking them to be the adult to resolve problems that are not meant for a child to resolve. That's what a parent or a caretaker is for. I'm going to help you, but don't worry. I will take care of the problem. I will handle it. Don't worry about it. But I've seen that. I've seen that where a surviving parent or adult almost wants to bring in this child that is absolutely not age ready and starts putting their woes on them or wanting them to, and you can't do that. It's like you have to put on your big boy pants or big girl pants and protect your child or children from things that they're not ready for. And tell them, don't worry, I will handle it. I will take care of it. All I need for you is, I'll be there. I need you to, let's do, I want you to pay attention at school. Things that are within their scope of control. But you don't lay things on them that they're not ready for. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, because it's just the kid's there, or you have a parent that's overwhelmed thinking, I got to take care of you. Well, I need to lay it on you and tell you how much of a burden you are because now I have to take care of you and blah, 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 blah. No, you don't do that. You don't do that. And I want to circle back to what Mark does, which is maybe you're one of these adults that needs to go and have a reading and maybe reach out to this person and say, are you okay? And by the way, maybe I realize I'm really mad because you were supposed to be here and help me bring up our children. This is for instance, of course. And, I love you, but I can't help that, you kind of like, in other words, you can't help feeling the way you do, even though you know that person perhaps didn't do it intentionally. Let's say somebody passes away from a disease or an accident. And they didn't choose it, but it happened. But you can't help it. You're mad. And sometimes having a reading helps you. Maybe that person says something like, I didn't mean to, or, I'm not there, but I am there. In other words, I'm trying to look out for you. I haven't abandoned you all the way. I might not be physically there, but I'm aware of what's going on. And let me tell you something. Sometimes things like that, communications like that, helps a lot. Helps a person like let go of that what if or how could you kind of like shadow boxing that people do in their head. and move on, because inevitably that is what your choice is. Live and thrive and carry on, especially for the ones, if you have children, especially if you have children, for the living, or for yourself. Very importantly, for yourself as well. There's a lot of people also that want to do the martyr thing. They want to forever be the martyr over this person's death. And a lot of times I think that once they have a communication, with their loved one, let's say if it's a widow or a widower, this person might tell them, keep going, marry somebody else, meet somebody else, have other children, or get married and have children, or whatever the circumstances were that pertain to their lives. It's like, I'm not expecting you to forever be loving me, and I will be mad, or that you're betraying me because you moved on with your life. And you think, well, aren't there a lot of people that do that? There's a lot, but there's a lot of other people that get hung up. And they have always this, like they owe it to that person, even if that person's dead. And sometimes hearing it, let's say in a communication, let's say like a medium like Mark Anthony, that especially after they give some type of validation, so that other person knows, this is really so and so, that person says, I don't want you to be my, forever stuck in the house waiting for what? I'm okay, and it's okay. And what I would hope for you is for you to move on with your life. And you'd be surprised, because there's a lot of people that'll happen, and they'll have loved ones going around saying, well, so-and-so would have wanted you to move on. But there's something that just makes it different when you have a reading where that person is coming through and telling you themselves, I want you to move on. It's okay to move on. It will be okay, and I'm okay. Like, be on your way and live your life. Yeah. Sometimes that's what those readings are good for those people that are stuck in the rut for, again, a variety of reasons. And, they're as innumerable as there are humans on the face of this earth. And, again, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. I have a great list of guests coming on. And I think it's great what Mark Anthony did when he did his tour. He transitioned into, hey, I'm going to do my tour. I'm just going to do it a different way. Because that's what we need. You got to adapt. We have to adapt. As things are being ironed out, and that we're facing things that nobody's ever had or thought we would be facing. Okay, we'll have to figure it out. And maybe some things will come back to the way they were, and others will not. And then we'll have to figure new ways of doing it. And eventually those new ways will become the norm. But life is still good. I mean, we have to, sometimes it takes a little bit of patience to have things worked out. And like I said, everybody's different, and I mean, me and Mark were talking about it, because a lot of people now, with what's happening, it's just about everything that's important to people: their health, their ability to generate money, to make money, to feed themselves, clothe their children, live their life, go out to Denny's and eat at whatever. I mean, basic stuff. It's everything at once that went sideways for a good majority. And I know it's a worldwide thing, but I'm going to talk as an American. For us, like, basically within days, it was like, what? What do you mean? Huh? That and of course things change, and it seems like everything changes. You watch something one day, and then 2 days later it's like, no, that's different now. It's like, oh, what? That and I'll say again what I've always said. I'm a humanist. I believe in humans. I believe in the goodness of humans. I believe that we will come out of this better than before, because we are adaptive. We can adapt. It's when people dig in their heels and say no. Yeah, there's some things that are worth preserving. Absolutely. But then there comes a time when things happen that you say, that's not going to work anymore. And we need to adapt. And believe it or not, that is the key to survival, is adaptability. Adaptability and this pursuit of happiness. Because that's, in the end, that's what we all want. To be happy. So again, guys, come back every week. And also, if you can look at the new books that have come out. I'm busy writing in between shows. A lot of writing. I've got 2 new books coming out now for 2020. Part of the Sybil Universe. You can go to marlenepardo.com and you can see what I'm working on. Besides that, I have that Stranger Than Fiction Stories, which is a blog about different, just weird news, new news, old news, just weird stuff that I come across in my research. I have different, you can find it on the MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You'll see there's a tab there for Stranger Than Fiction. You can find me on Blogger at Stranger Than Fiction Stories. Or on Amazon. You can find me. I just released it's 3 short stories. It's like what I call horror light for young adults. And I have it for free as Smashwords. If you want to find it there, it's called I've Come for My Girl and 2 Other Dark Tales. Marlene Pardo Pellicer. I am going to be putting that out. It's book 1 of Winter Shade Stories. I'm sorry. I'm going to be putting out some of those. It's like a little side. So yeah, bottom line, I'm busy farming. Farming, writing the shows. And basically just going along for the roller coaster, that hold tight, here we go. I think it's exciting in the end of it all. So again, guys, take care. I hope you're all well. See you next time.